Now first things first. Just in case you aren't yet familiar with SCP-049, otherwise known as the infamous Plague Doctor, then we're here to bring you up to speed. It'll help you get the most out of today's tale. SCP-049 is a tall humanoid entity, always seen wearing long black robes, a hood over its head, and a beaked mask protruding from underneath. The same kind of mask worn by physicians during the height of the Black Death. However, these parts of the Plague Doctor's attire aren't just a costume. The SCP Foundation discovered that all of SCP-049's outfit is actually part of his physical body. In other words, the robes, the hood, the mask, they are all made out of muscle and bone. The Plague Doctor's only real goal in life is to hunt down any person it deems to be infected. The entity often refers to something he calls the Pestilence, and upon sensing this affliction in a human being, SCP-049 will attempt to make direct skin contact with whoever is apparently carrying said pestilence. The Plague Doctor's touch is lethal, killing anyone he comes into contact with. You might think that's as bad as it gets, that this creature just goes from person to person killing them via touch. But you would be wrong. It gets worse. Killing one of his victims is only the start. Afterwards, SCP-049 then begins performing a crude, outdated form of surgery, defiling and repurposing the person's corpse. Using equipment that he produces from his iconic doctor's bag, he injects a number of unknown chemicals into a person's carcass, eventually turning them into an instance of SCP-049-2. In essence, a vicious, incredibly aggressive zombie. The most bizarre part in SCP-049's mind, this means he's just cured you. Naturally, SCP-049 is already held in containment, safely locked away by the SCP Foundation. At present, SCP-049 resides in a humanoid holding cell, closely monitored by surveillance cameras for 24 hours a day, every single day. The SCP Foundation used to send its doctors and researchers into SCP-049's cell, or would make a habit of bringing him cadavers as test subjects, fresh bodies for the Plague Doctor to hone his surgical skills. The researchers would keenly observe the Doctor transforming the dead into instances of SCP-049-2. But these researchers and doctors working for the Foundation weren't exactly free of disease, meaning every time they entered SCP-049's cell, they were at risk of receiving his deadly touch. In this cage with this deadly, dangerous doctor that spends all his time in captivity, that's where our story starts. But while you might expect a story about the Plague Doctor to revolve solely around violence, disease, and death, this tale offers a surprising divergence. Boiled, Scrambled, and Fried is a story about an unexpected new life coming into existence in a frankly bizarre fashion, all starting in that tiny containment chamber where SCP-049 had been held since the Foundation first captured him. It had been increasingly obvious to the researchers observing him that something was quite wrong with the Plague Doctor. For the first time since the Doctor had arrived in the Foundation's custody, he appeared to have fallen ill unexpectedly. The security cameras that were trained on him day in and day out recorded SCP-049 groaning in pain, clutching his stomach as he limped weakly around the confines of his cell. Had the pestilence finally gotten the better of the good doctor? Was he too now infected, the same as the world around him? The Foundation's medics were confused, baffled as to what could possibly be wrong with the creature. Of course, it would also have been easier to examine the Doctor if they could easily touch him without the risk of dying, or if his body wasn't made of skin robes. Nonetheless, the Plague Doctor was brought to a medical station for a proper diagnosis, under the orders of one Dr. Richard O'Mell, a Foundation doctor who specialized in taking care of humanoid anomalies, and who had been assigned as SCP-049's caretaker. The creature tried to assure Dr. O'Mell that he was strong enough to withstand the intense pain he was obviously suffering from. Putting on gloves for safety, Dr. O'Mell felt a distinct lump within SCP-049's stomach, initially believing it to be a case of abdominal distension. This is a condition that occurs when gases or fluids build up in the stomach and cause it to swell up and inflate, usually as a symptom of another internal disease. But SCP-049 reassured his caretaker that his condition wasn't the result of any disease, and in fact, it had even apparently happened before. Dr. O'Mell asked SCP-049 why he had never told the Foundation about this, or why the creature wouldn't explain what was happening.
I did not think you would believe me, so I said nothing,
SCP-049 explained.
Doctor, I am pregnant. I'm sorry, but I can't explain it. Please, just let me return to my cell. I need to make the proper preparations.
Naturally, this statement was met with stunned belief by Dr. O'Mell, especially seeing as the Foundation had been observing SCP-049 through security cameras for months on end without stopping. The creature couldn't explain, tensing up and breathing heavily due to suffering obvious and intense pain. As Dr. O'Mell rushed out to grab more members of medical staff, the Plague Doctor continued struggling against the aches, letting out his loudest of cries yet, as an extreme bout of agony surged through him. A pearly white egg gently tumbled out from SCP-049's robes just as Dr. O'Mell and a group of Foundation medics arrived, staring in shock at what had just happened. Seeming to recover quite quickly, the Plague Doctor asked to be unshackled and returned to his cell to tend to the egg, worried it would die unless he was able to care for it. As the shocked Dr. O'Mell agreed, SCP-049 gently picked up the egg and cradled it in his arms. Of course, this all came as quite an unexpected turn of events to the Foundation. Reports were filed and archive entries had to be updated. But they allowed the Plague Doctor to keep his egg and raise it, perhaps just so they could watch and research as it happened instead of out of any sense of kindness. For the next 5 days, the creature was fixated entirely on caring for the egg. All his energy focused on it. He built a nest in the corner of his containment cell, out of fabric and paper, and would sit on the egg in order to keep it warm. During that time, a number of Foundation researchers assigned to watch over SCP-049 reported that they had heard clucking noises coming through the speakers in the observation room. Now assigned to watch and report on SCP-049's progress, Dr. O'Mell watched the Plague Doctor from the observation room connected to the cameras and audio recording devices in the creature's cell. Ever since the bizarre and unanticipated birth, O'Mell had been given the task of compiling an extensive report on everything that took place within the cell. For the most part, everything seemed fine, or as fine as something so unusual could seem. The egg was in a healthy condition nonetheless, although the whole event had the Foundation Doctor wondering. SCP-049 had always had a somewhat bird-like appearance, helped in no small part by that infamous beak-shaped mask. Did the fact that this creature could apparently lay eggs mean that the Plague Doctor was some form of humanoid bird, an avian-human hybrid that only mimicked the Plague Doctors of old? Or had those medieval physicians created their masks to emulate SCP-049? Which had come first, the Plague Doctors or the Plague Doctor? A debate as confusing and cyclical as the one about the chicken or the egg. And now the Plague Doctor also had an egg. I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get a headache just thinking about it. SCP-049 had begun to softly peck at the surface of the egg, when Dr. O'Mell decided to step in and look for some answers to his burning questions. Over the speakers in 049's cell, he asked for an explanation. The Plague Doctor answered that he was checking his egg for signs of life within its shell, as if that answer should have been obvious. And he had succeeded. There was definitely something living inside. As the Plague Doctor returned to sitting atop the egg, O'Mell asked outright if SCP-049 was, in fact, a bird. It was uncommon, if not downright unheard of, for a humanoid anomaly to lay eggs like this. After a moment's thought, SCP-049 replied with,
"No. As far as I'm aware, I have never been a bird. Yet producing eggs is natural to me."
He explained that while this had happened before, it had been at least a few decades since the last time. Then the Plague Doctor went back to sitting on his egg, humming as it rocked back and forth in the nest. 10 days passed after the egg had first arrived, and now SCP-049's cell was brimming with activity. Foundation personnel had fitted the room with a glass screen to protect them from the Plague Doctor, with researchers piling into the safe side, carrying cameras and hurriedly taking notes, protected by a number of guards. The big day had seemingly arrived. Whatever had been brimming and brewing inside the egg was about to hatch. As the researchers all whispered to each other with excitement and intrigue, SCP-049 stood protectively on the other side of the room, just waiting in fascinated expectation. The pearlescent egg started to shake suddenly, its pale surface cracking. The crack spread from the center of the egg, forking across the shell like a lightning bolt over a dark, cloudy sky. Something underneath was pushing through, pressing outwards from within the egg. splitting it apart as it had tapped and pecked its way to freedom. A small white beak poked a hole through the shell that surrounded it, piercing the egg at last. The creature within, this spawn of the Plague Doctor, began to tear itself through the barrier that had kept it safe from the outside world until it was ready to take its first steps. With both arms, the thing tore itself out of the egg, all under the watch of the Foundation's doctors and researchers who were stunned to see another Plague Doctor emerging from the egg. It was small, much smaller than the father that had birthed it and cared for it while it was waiting to hatch. But it was nonetheless a perfect miniature version of SCP-049, complete with the same kind of robes, the same beaked mask, even with a little hat on top of its head. With a gasp of pure excitement, the original Plague Doctor lifted up his new mini-self and hugged the child in his arms. The excitement that had filled the room up now quickly dissipated, as the audience of Foundation personnel quickly realized that they had just witnessed the live birth of a brand new anomaly, of which they understood virtually nothing. As Dr. O'Mell stepped forward to cautiously ask SCP-049 to put down its offspring, the smaller Plague Doctor smacked O'Mell's hand with a stick, before leaping from its father's arms and dashing out of the cell. As alarms began to blare indicating a breach in containment, SCP-049 wiped a tear from his eyes, stating,
"He is the cure."
The new smaller Plague Doctor, now designated as SCP-049-J, seems to have a talent for evading capture by the Foundation, and for frequently escaping containment. Unlike its predecessor, SCP-049, this offspring has a body beneath its robes that is composed mostly of moss, wads of tissue, and smaller Plague Doctor masks. During the occasions in which it has been successfully detained by the Foundation, SCP-049-J has claimed that it is in fact a powerful magical doctor and wizard, with the ability to cure all that ails mankind. However, to date, it has been unable to cure anything, usually making medical conditions actively worse, my headache included. Now go check out SCP-049 The Plague Doctor Captured, and SCP-049 What Actually is the Pestilence? The Plague Doctor Questions and Theories for more on the not-so-good doctor.